Hello, art historians. I still can't talk. I couldn't talk in the last one. I can't talk now either. All right, so it's just been a long day. Sorry about that. So we are wrapping up this unit. This is our very last unit for our last lecture for Unit 5. I know this has been a big beast of a unit, and I appreciate that. So if you have any questions at any time, please let me know. I am happy to help you. I will also be putting together a study guide for you for this. So let's wrap this up by looking at by far one of my favorite things to talk about, and that's the Inca Empire, because I think they are truly underrated in history, and I think they are far superior to so many others that we have talked about. But the Inca are going to establish the first South American empire, and it's going to be around for quite some time until really they get conquered by the Spanish, similar to what's going to happen to the Aztecs. So they're one of the later ones to develop, but they're also one of the later ones to be conquered. So that does kind of help in terms of their continuity. What is probably the most impressive about them is the capital cities that the Incas created in some incredibly tough geographic areas, like really, really tough locations. They were able to build over 4,000 miles of suspension bridges running through these mountains. They were able to create terrace farming, like basically farming into mountains using natural irrigation from the runoff from the mountains to farm things like potatoes and chocolate. And to them, art and architecture was very, very functional, just like with other places we've talked about. In fact, really the only place we've really looked at art in a way that was supposed to be just like decorative and pretty and not really a function for it was Greece. I mean, aside from like every place else that really had a function and kind of a message behind it, Rome, I guess, too. But anyway, I digress. So, art and architecture was to visually benefit the state. And like one of the things that the Inca did that I think was fascinating is the way that they did their taxes was through labor. So, like, you would actually, instead of paying money, you would serve your time in labor. And what the people would see is actually this was a benefit to everyone because of the things that were created, like roads and bridges and public works. Now, all of these things were for everybody. Some of them were to visually reinforce the power of the emperor. So, for example, some of the palaces that we're going to look at, or the entire complexes that they created, are going to be for that reason. And we have found at places like Machu Picchu that a lot of the people who were buried there weren't actually from there. It was people from the empire who were forced to come and live there as a way to visually remind them of the power of the emperor that they were serving. And this is not uncommon. Louis XIV will do this with the Palace of Versailles. But anyway, we're going to see some amazing art and architecture that reflects the power of this empire. So just to give you an idea of where this empire is going to be, picking up along the same lines of where the Chavin were. So one place that we have to look at is the city of Cusco. And if you've ever seen Emperor's New Groove, the term Cusco means llama, which is something that they very commonly had around this part of the world. And Cusco was the political capital of the Incan Empire. And what's amazing about this is it was designed to be in the shape of a jaguar, because the king was basically the jaguar. He was a very powerful entity. And so this could basically represent him as the jaguar ruling over this. All right. So maybe the king of all of these things. The river that ran through this was the spine, which I think is kind of cool because that's the backbone. And basically what they depend on. And then there is the belly, which is the marketplace or the plaza where people got what they need to eat and trade. The head was a fortress, like a military headquarters. And then the heart was the central square. So just like we saw with the Roman Forum and the Forbidden City and the Athenian Agora, there was a distinct plan put in place. And again, they considered this almost like an axis mundi, like because it connected the king, who was the jaguar, who could see into the next world, to this other world. And what's really crazy about this is the Sapa Inca, who was the king of the Incas, would live here. And so there would be like that military fortress and palace. But they actually divided this area up into 4 quarters. And where you were from in the empire was where you lived in that quadrant. So for example, if you were from the northeast, you lived in the northeast of Cusco, which is kind of showing like the diversity of this empire, but together they make an entire empire together. So it's kind of like a map of the empire, basically. So you can kind of see here, I mean, I guess it doesn't really look like a jaguar, but it was meant to look like a jaguar. So this is the exterior walls, and you actually had a assignment looking at the walls. So this is the exterior walls of the city on the outside. And these are called the walls of Sacsayhuaman, all right? And when these were discovered, they thought it was absolutely incredible because these rocks were so well carved and fitted together that a knife could not fit between them, is the quote that they used about Incan architecture. So these walls, if you notice, are a little bit rougher and they're absolutely huge and they're in different shapes. One big fan of them was the trapezoid. They really like the trapezoid shape. But this is that ashlar masonry, all right? And that ashlar masonry was deliberately done because all these rocks are of all different sizes. Some are stronger, some are bigger than the other, but they all fit together perfectly, just like all the people of the empire together fit together, even though they're all different shapes and sizes, they all fit together and unify into one great empire. So sorry about the pause. My janitor came in and had to clean my room up for a second. So one of the things that's also unique about this is that the Aztecs would force people that they conquered, kind of like that tax tribute system, to come and help build these walls as basically a visible reminder of we are strong, we are powerful, and you work for us now. But these actually benefit all of us because it's nice protection on the exterior of the city. So everything was kind of meant to reinforce the empire as much as possible, literally and physically reinforce it. So this is kind of a view of like what those looked like, that they were so well created and so well fit together without mortar. Like there was nothing wet put between these to hold them together, because in the event of earthquakes, these could shift a little bit, which did commonly happen in this part of the world. So it was extremely awesome technique that they were using. And you can see here just kind of a scale of, that's not me for the record or anybody I know, I just found that picture. But you can see here just how big some of these were and how well fit together they were made. So I do want to show you those walls in comparison to this one. So also located in Cusco is this wall right here. And this wall is all that remains of a temple that used to be here. And notice that the temple is gone now, and built on top of it is a European style monastery, because that's what it is. So what was originally placed here was what was called the Temple of the Sun. And the sun god, whose name was Inti, was so important to the Incas. So Inti was this god's name. And this temple to Inti was this original wall, which is also ashlar masonry, was originally gold plated. And you can see that because this wall was for the gods and not necessarily for protection, that this wall is much more pristine. It's much more clean cut. It's much smoother to kind of reflect the importance of what this building was for. But unfortunately, that entire temple was torn down as a way to, again, crush the spirit of the people that they conquered and show the conquest of Spanish Catholicism, which is what this is, over the top of the Spanish temple or the Inca temple. So again, this is for Inti, the god of the sun, and it's that precision cut ashlar masonry. Like it's not like the hard and rough that we see on the walls of Sacsayhuaman, and it would have been covered with the polished gold to reflect the light of the sun and shown as brilliance, which of course all of this was taken. So again, we see another culture very focused on that sun deity. Same thing with the Aztecs, their sun and war god was the same guy. So today it's the convent of Santo Domingo and a monastery put in its place. And this is not uncommon. We see this happen all the time. The Pantheon was turned into a Christian church. The Parthenon became a mosque and then a church. The Mosque of Cordoba in Spain was actually built using remains from a Christian church. St. Peter's Basilica was built using columns from a Roman temple. The Hagia Sophia in the Byzantine Empire or Turkey is today a mosque. So we do see that happen because politics is religion and religion is politics. And if you're reinforcing a religion, you're reinforcing the politics of that particular culture as well. I just found this, for any of you guys who are Office fans, I thought this was really funny. Maybe you won't, I don't know, sorry. So what is really crazy is that in the backyard of this temple, all right, so the temple's name was Coricancha. I should probably back up and make sure you guys see that, all right? So this was Coricancha, or the Golden House, all right? In the back of it, they found this little garden. And what is crazy about the garden is it wasn't growing actual crops. Buried in it or growing in it were little pieces of metal, humans, and animals and crops. I mean, they were basically growing or planted to look like they were growing there, and they were made out of precious metals, right? And it was a very particular thing that they did to make it look as realistic as they possibly could, because this garden basically grew everything that was in the empire. So basically, since it's growing in the garden of Coricancha, which is for the sun grows all of these things. And Coricancha was the center of all this, which basically means like the Inca Empire and Cusco was the center of everything. So it basically showed, in short, that the Incas controlled the world and what grew in this empire. So these were like little versions of this, right? So like little people, little animals, little llamas, little corn. And this right here is the maize cob, all right? So obviously corn, which was the most important crop that they grew. And in an effort to make this look as realistic as possible, you can notice that the corn, which was black corn, was made of oxidized metal. Like they had gone through this specific process to turn this black because it would look like the actual corn that they grew. And then the leaves, the ears of the corn are a different color. And they use this technique called repousse, which means they pushed from the inside out to create the appearance of the corn cobs, because they want to make this look as realistic as possible so that like it's like if you grow it, it will come. So almost like going back to that shamanistic practice that we saw in the Hall of the Bulls. All right, so when people think of South America and they think of the Incas, they don't actually think of Cusco a whole lot unless you've watched The Emperor's New Groove. But The Emperor's New Groove was actually more about a real life place called Machu Picchu, which was discovered much later, all right? And Machu Picchu, just like in The Emperor's New Groove, was designed as a resort, basically for the emperor. Like it was his royal retreat, and the emperor would come and stay here during certain times. And so therefore, everything that had to be there needed to be set up to reinforce not only his rule, but also that connection with the sun god as much as possible. Now, Machu Picchu is built in a very isolated area. Like it took them forever to find this. And people from throughout the empire were required to come and help build this, like to show the power of the emperor. They were required to come live there so they could see the power of the emperor, even when he wasn't there. Like this was a visual reminder of how important the emperor was. It is 7,000 miles above sea level, all right, which is pretty incredible. We can see very clearly that it was Inca because we had discovered Cusco first. So we were able to look at this and go, okay, there's a lot of trapezoids. You can see the shape of the window in a trapezoid, which would have more of that point, kind of that upward point. The ashlar masonry, we can see the more important buildings had the more pristine and polished appearance of the rocks. But there's over 200 buildings that were in this place. There's houses, there's temples, there's a palace, and they actually funneled water into this area from the mountains, similar way to the Romans did the aqueducts. And there was actually a private royal bath for the emperor that was fed by these mountain streams. So this is Machu Picchu, which apparently you can take a bus to, or which is a big journey, or you can walk there, which nobody could ever pay me to do this because I would trip and be dead. And if you look down the sides of this, you can see the steppe, the terrace farming that they like cut into the mountains and then used irrigation from the mountains to actually create this green appearance, because it's still green, it's still thriving. It was naturally irrigated to be able to grow and feed the people who lived in this area. And you can see it's kind of separated. Like you've got up here on the left, this high important area in the highest point that would have actually been the emperor's palace, and then also the temple there, like the hitching post of the sun that I'll talk about, and then the residential areas over near where the crops would be grown. Just to show you guys this, like all the rooms that would have been in this, all the homes, all the little areas, and the masonry still stands. Like that ashlar masonry of Inca design still is there. So one area that we can see that's obviously of very big importance, and we know this because it looks like Coricancha with the way that the stones are more polished and more fitted and more straight and organized and more perfect, is the observatory. And the observatory would have been used to track the movements of the sun and the stars. So kind of like that ability to control things that they can't control and understanding the patterns of the sun. So this observatory was actually connected to the residence of the emperor, which is kind of crazy because his residence isn't even as smooth and pristine as the observatory was. So what it contained was something called an Intihuatana stone, and they're not 100% sure what it was for, but they did call it the hitching post of the sun because during certain times the sun would pass through the windows and the shadow would go through the windows and connect to the Intihuatana stone. So basically it would look like a shadow rope connecting this to the sun. So almost like basically saying that they control the sun, or like the sun is connected to them. All right. And it's kind of crazy because it aligns perfectly when the times with the summer and fall equinox, when the sun would be directly overhead it and leave no shadow. And there's a tab sticking off of it that points to the true magnetic north. So again, that idea of being able to control or connect to these macrocosmic forces, again, also bringing in the 4 cardinal directions. All right, so this is kind of show you guys like how this would look. All right, so you've got the central plaza, all right, and then these are the tombs down here, but then Intihuatana and then the imperial palace and the funeral areas. So on March 21st and September 21st, there is an equinox and the sun literally sits on the stone. Like it sits right over the top and leaves no shadow. So it's like sitting directly on it. And you can see that tab. Now look at this. Like you can see that nowhere else does it have that perfect ashlar masonry, like very pristine, like Coricancha's side. And then there inside of it is the hitching post of the sun. So obviously religion was a little bit more important than rule was. All right. So again, we can see the similarities to Cusco, which is what told us that this was Inca, this Machu Picchu. All right. And the temples, you know, the trapezoid direction, like all of those things, the ashlar masonry to build it really revealed that this was Inca. Now, not everything in the Incas was about architecture. There were other ways that they showed their rule. And again, we talked about this at the beginning, that the medium is everything. And the more rare a medium was, the more important it was to the person who had it, and it showed their status. All right. So because they don't have a great deal of wool or materials like that, to get anything that you could make a true textile out of, a textile garment, was a very big deal. And animal hair, like llama hair, was so much better because it holds the colors deeper. Like it actually absorbs colors and makes them appear more rich. And what they would do is in the empire, they would conquer women who had this ability to make this kind of textiles, and they would put them in seclusion almost as prisoners. And this would be their job, and force them to make these things for rulers, and also to keep that a secret so that not everybody could have such beautiful things like this. So the red and blue colors really, really stand out on animal wool. Like it really shows up very well. And what they would create were these tunics. So like picture your head going through the center of it, like a poncho. So like it drapes over the front and the back, and covering it would be these different patterns. And I almost liken these to kind of like Girl Scout badges, because like each pattern denoted an achievement or something that you had done. So like, here's your war badge, here's your prisoners of war badge. And like only after you conquered so many people could you get certain badges and show your status. So the fact that it has all of these different intricate patterns denotes the power of the person visually, but also the fact that they had one that was made out of something like a textile, kind of like the Aztec feather headdress. So we called this the Altacapu tunic, all right, which was most likely worn by an Incan ruler because it was very, very rare. So there would be the slit in the center for you to wear it. And this is actually, you can see the slit up at the top that this would have draped over the head. And there would have been areas for your arms to come out for the side. And this could definitely show maybe different badges were different parts of the empire that they had been or conquered, or number of people that they had captured, or achievements that they had done, or great military victories. And obviously, this was a rare material that would have taken a lot of time to make, with not a lot of people knowing how to do it. So whoever had this, the takapus are the little badges, and this is all takapus, like it's from top to bottom covered in all these different badges. So this would be walking propaganda, not only in the content of the badges, but the form and the medium of how it was made out of this wool and using these dark cultures. And like the different black and white checkerboard, like that's military status. So that would denote a warrior pattern. So South America shows us, just like with all these other parts of the world, that there were advanced civilizations going on with empires and classical belief systems and devoted religions and art and architecture that reflect that. So the Americas cannot be forgotten, as this very advanced place with art and architecture that is noteworthy.